Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to this podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you return for future episodes and new content. And if you're a returning listener or a viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back. And I hope that today's episode is one that you will find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So, before we get started with the main event, just a reminder for my followers. If you haven't subscribed already on the YouTube channel, make sure you hit that red button. This will allow you to get future notifications on new episodes of that Day Talk for Educators Live podcast. Also, if you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other streaming platform, make sure you subscribe there as well. And for those who would like to donate or provide some financial contributions to help us build this platform, make sure you go to Cash App, where the handle is #IDTALK4ED, or you can go to Venmo with the handle at KwameSM. That is at symbol KWAMESM. And of course, to catch up on past episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at identitytalk4educators.com. As always, thank you all for the support in helping us build this platform. So, today's episode is one that may pull some of your heartstrings today. It's one that's inspiring. It's one that is just touching, and there's so many twists and turns with the story of today's guest that you can help but learn some lessons just from her journey. And she is somebody who I actually met through Clubhouse, and this is around the time when Clubhouse was still piloting different things and figuring things out. And I had a chance to meet this guest just through some education panels and conversations. And from the moment we started to connect, I just saw how dope she was. And ever since, I've just been following her journey all the way up into her becoming the 2023 Illinois Teacher of the Year. Yes, so we have ourselves a celebrity, and she's probably going to downplay that, but she's a celebrity in my eyes. She's somebody that does phenomenal work in education, and I'm honored to have her on. And we've been trying to get this thing to happen for a while, so finally, we're able to get her on to share her story. So without further ado, let me bring on a good friend, Briana Morales, to the show to talk about her journey and all the cool things she's doing right now in this work. So let's bring Briana on. Bree,
Hi.
what's going on?
Good to see you after so long. Feels like we haven't connected in ages. So happy to
I
be here.
know we've both been busy in our own right, but
Right.
first and foremost, welcome and congratulations on everything.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It is crazy to be the 2023 Illinois Teacher of the Year. And yes, I think that all teachers deserve that type of recognition, but I really outdid myself with this one. So happy to be here and thank you for having me.
Well, the honor is well deserved, and I'm just glad to be able to unpack some of your story, which I know you shared on other platforms, but hopefully in this next hour or so, we can really dissect some of the parts of the story that people may not even know about you, because it wasn't an easy road. And as we get deeper into the conversation, people will find out what that road was like. But let's start in the beginning. Before we got into this work, we probably had other aspirations. Maybe we didn't. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, who or what inspired you to become an educator?
Yeah, so I think that I've been asked that question countless times since the announcement of Teacher of the Year. Curious minds always want to know what inspired you to become a teacher. And the story that I always go back to is centered in middle school. So middle school educators are going to feel this one, that middle school is a completely overwhelming and very difficult to navigate time for most 12 and 13-year-olds, but particularly for me when my already blended family took a turn and in some ways was destroyed after a lifetime in my childhood of trauma and grief. And in those years, the emotions were almost too much to bear. And because of that, I attempted suicide in the 7th grade. I returned to school after I was in psychiatric rehabilitation to a teacher, my 7th grade English teacher, who had blonde hair and always painted nails. She had such a cool voice, and she always talked to me very calmly in all of my moments of frustration. And I didn't know it at the time, but it's a significant part of the story that during this moment in my life, she was also battling breast cancer, and many of us had no idea. But somehow she still found a way to equip me with the skills to fight my own mental battles and overcome the challenges in my life when she was quite literally fighting for hers. And so looking back on that year, I see a little girl in so much pain who desperately felt that life was a gift that she wanted to return. And I think that a lot of people have experienced something that was a catalyst for their breakthrough or for finding their passion. And in this story, the love and compassion of a teacher is what led to mine. As an educator, I firmly believe that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship, and that one positive relationship in a young person's life can break many chains and heal unspoken wounds. My 7th grade English teacher is the one who introduced me to expressive writing in the fall of my 7th grade year as a way to process all of the things that I was going through and to truly transition that pain into power. And it was in her English class that I wrote my very first poetry book and never looked back. And so poetry and expressive writing and the foundation of relationships, being able to change the trajectory of a child's life, is what started in my relationship with my 7th grade English teacher. And so I have her to thank for saving my life, literally, and also for the legacy of love that lives on through my teaching because of her. So if someone was to ask me what inspired me to become an educator, it's less of a what and more of a who. My 7th grade English teacher saved my life, and I aim to do the exact same thing through my teaching for my own students.
Yes. Shout out to
Miss
Mrs. Jennifer
Steineke.
Steineke. Yes. Shout out to her. Is she still teaching today?
Yes, I actually found her online. I was Googling her in like the middle of the night in February when I was announced as a finalist for Illinois Teacher of the Year. And I wrote this long email where I poured my heart out, and I was like, I just hope that you remember me. And I was just wondering if you wanted to be my guest at the banquet. And she actually emailed me back in the middle of my 6-hour class. And so it popped up on the smart board in the corner, and I screamed like this blood curdling scream. And my students were like, what is going on? And so I pulled up the email, and it's actually something that I've shown in a lot of my keynotes that I've been giving across the state of Illinois now about the power of teacher and student relationships. She wrote me back, and she was just so overcome with all of the things that I've been able to do. And she said, I'm so proud that you credit me with a small part of your accomplishments, but I want you to know that I do indeed remember you. And so in the 7th grade, I was 12, and I'm 28 now, and I have not talked to her since then, but she remembered me. And after 16 years, she was my guest at the Teacher of the Year banquet, and she got to meet one of my students who's now becoming a teacher as well. So it was the most beautiful full circle moment ever. And it truly is the testimony that relationships with our students span further than we will ever.
Yeah, I'm still trying to find my favorite teacher after all these years. And this is going back to my elementary school days.
Oh,
So we're
wow.
talking early 90s when I had this teacher. So it's been over 30 years since I've been in a classroom. I've been trying to find her through social media, through old archives, yellow pages. See, these young folks don't know about yellow pages. So I'm dating myself a little bit. But I haven't struck gold yet, but I'm still trying to find her. I really am. So Mrs. Steineke, she has such an impact on you. I'm just wondering, if she never came into your life, would you still have those same aspirations of becoming an educator? Had she not come at that time, you were going through those struggles?
I think that my original thought of what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I was very young, which I had no reference for, so I don't know where this came from, was becoming a lawyer. And I think back to what the reason of that was. it was that I wanted to protect people, and to protect people from what? I'm thinking protect people from pain. And so then when I go through an emotional experience in my life as a student where I was in a significant amount of pain, the one person who was able to make a breakthrough in my life was no one related to anything else besides being a teacher. And so my mission as a teacher has developed from that significant time where someone taught me that I could turn my pain into power and that could reveal my purpose. And so that has become the foundation of my life's work in wanting to become an educator and what I aim to do for my students and the work that we do. So it transitioned what the goal was because I found a way to do exactly what's me through teaching.
And this is a perfect segue into the next question, because I know you worked at an alternative school, and for those who aren't familiar with alternative schools, and it's different in every state, but generally with alternative schools, usually you have students who either haven't matriculated enough credits to graduate in the, I guess, in a traditional school setting. Sometimes it's students who may have certain behavioral or just traumatic challenges that don't allow them to thrive in their regular school setting. Now I'm not sure what the makeup is at the alternative school you were at, but I really feel like when I hear your story, a lot of that maybe parallels to some of the lives that your students may have. So you're able to relate to them in a certain way that maybe other teachers aren't able to. So I'd love for you to just share what are some of the experiences you've had working in that setting, and how does that differ? Or matter of fact, how has that shaped your old perspective on the education system?
Yeah, I think that alternative entities kind of operate differently, as you said, wherever you are. But most often, kids and students can resonate with the idea that it almost feels like alternative sites are a place where we throw people away and where people are cast aside and they feel like they have been written off by everyone
Right.
because of maybe things that they have done, but oftentimes many things that are just manifestations of the barriers to their success. And so their traditional setting was not working for them. An alternative setting is a different setting where perhaps we can unlock that potential and forge those relationships to get them on a pathway to self-actualize in a different setting. And so I view alternative sites as a place of possibility where we can freedom dream with our students about a new world that does meet their needs and works for them. So when I first became a teacher, I taught in a traditional public high school for 1 year. I taught 9th and 10th grade English. And there were many things that I learned in that first year of teaching that just simply were not working for me as a teacher, and definitely were not working for the students. I'm thinking of many of my colleagues, many of whom, we know, and many of us have walked that path ourselves, especially secondary educators who are seeing students who are in class sizes that are in upwards of 30, 35 students per class,
Yeah.
especially those of us who are in urban areas where many of us don't even have that many desks for our students, let alone perhaps a teacher's aide or someone else in the room to help make meaningful instruction for all 35 kids. And so one of the biggest things that I think has significantly impacted my educational experience as a teacher, and then also for my students in alternative ed, is that the setting is smaller and allows us just to do so much more for them. And so at my alternative school, we have, brace yourselves for this because some people might have a heart attack, a 10-to-1 student teacher ratio. And so that for secondary educators is something unbelievable. That's
That's
something
a gift.
it's something that we dream of, and it shouldn't have to be a dream, right? So when we think of the things that we want for our students, we want to send our students to a school where their teacher has adequate time to be helping them to develop the skills that they may be lacking and to provide services that are fully meeting their needs. And so when teachers are so spread thin with so many students in their classrooms, also understanding that many of the students in an alternative setting may be coming at various developmental levels, it is so much easier to help them hand over hand in a smaller setting. And I'm also thinking about the relationships that we are able to build in alternative settings that sometimes are just not possible, right, in a larger setting. So many of the students who might feel uncomfortable, and those might be barriers for why they are failing to take academic risks, or where they don't feel comfortable reaching out for help, all of those things might feel a little bit different when you're in a smaller class size, and might enable you to be more successful. And in the alternative school where I teach, I also loop with my students. Looping is a magical gift that educators in lower grades experience all the time, right? You hear all the time, oh, I looped with my second graders and then I moved up to third grade and I got to teach them again. Secondary teachers have no idea what that's like, because we're in a school that's super huge, and I might teach a ninth grade student and I might see them again when they graduate, but I don't get to teach them again. And so in my school, I am the 11th and 12th grade teacher. So I get to see my students first when they come in and they're 16 years old, and then I get to see them graduate at 18, 19 years old. And so we're able to loop for several years together, and that helps us to make that impact that lasts a lifetime in their lives. And I think that those trusting relationships are the foundation for the things that we've been able to do. And so our celebrations and the things that we are helping them with also look different and are centered around different milestones and maybe students who are in traditional settings. So when I think of many of my students, a lot of my students are young parents. And so when we are helping them navigate that time or part of their life, there are resources that we're able to connect them with, and services and programming that we have built into our school day that specifically focuses around developing young parents and providing them with the resources that they need to be able to pass that greatness down to their children and to build a strong foundation for their kids, which is something that I found missing from my traditional public school experience before I moved into the alternative space. It was almost like we were treating every single kid the same, and like their life circumstances outside of school had no bearing on what we were doing with them in those 8 hours. And so I think that alternative schools offer us that flexibility and more choice to develop that student agency, where they're helping us co-create those experiences of what's most meaningful for them, and then also helping them with those critical life milestones outside of school where they might need more guidance from, and we just have that ability to do that in an alternative setting.
And I think with alternative schools, they get a bad rap. I'm even thinking back to 20 plus years ago when I first started teaching. And if you were a child that was getting suspended and you're chronically truant from school, you would just be sent to an alternative school. So they treat it as if it was a prison, and which is wrong. But then I'm thinking to now we're having so many conversations about education versus schooling. We have so many questions about our traditional K-12 school system and how we structure classes, the type of subjects that we're having students take, and how it doesn't always align with the 21st century and the needs and what the needs are for the students. So when you talk about alternative schools in this current context, I feel like it can serve as a template for where our traditional K-12 schools can be, as opposed to this reputation of just being a place where you just dump kids who just are bad or just don't know what they're doing. I think the negative response that they may have to that traditional setting is something that we should pay more attention to and really just unpack.
Yeah, I think that that's part of why I regard them as healing centered spaces as well,
Yes.
because there's just so much that does not work for our students in traditional settings. And so we're able to co-create something that does and reflects their needs, and also the knowledge that they already bring, that we can capitalize to make this a more humanizing experience when so many of them have felt dehumanized before they got to us. And so I think one way that we also do that in our alternative school, which is really significant, is we are a competency-based education pilot school through the Illinois State Board of Education. And so there are over 25 school sites representing in upwards of 40 districts across the state of Illinois that are participating in these pilots. And so for those who are watching who don't know what competency-based education is, it's similar to mastery-based grading or standards-based grading. systems with a mix of project-based learning and student agency is the focus. And so students are graded on a 4-3-2-1 scale instead of a 100-point scale towards mastery of a competency instead of completion of work. So students are focused on designing artifacts that show me this is how I know XYZ, and here's what I've created to show you that I can do that, instead of me dragging students along at a teacher's pace, knowing that my kids are coming in at various developmental levels, and pacing guides don't allow us to provide that individualized, personalized instruction that students need to be ultimately successful. And so in CBE, there are no deadlines and there's no pace that we are enforcing students to go at. So that really enables students who may have other priorities than being at school 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. They may be head of household and they might be working. So that might not be possible for them to be in a class that's learning the same thing every single hour. And so they can come in and make their schedule work for them, allow us to work on the mastery of those competencies. And once you show me that you got it, you get to move on while I can help the other students who still need that assistance. And so I think that's also enabled us to help students to kind of step into that area where they feel courageous and comfortable and supported enough to take those academic risks, because we know that there's a literacy deficit across the country. There are many reasons we can talk about why that is and approaches to fix it, but specifically for Black children in schools, when we're talking about literacy, I think that it is so important that we are designing models that speak to the needs that they have and providing results based pedagogy that's going to change that for them. So my students come in reading between a 3rd and 5th grade level at 11th and 12th grade. So what does it look like in a competency-based setting where I can start that student maybe at a 3rd grade level and scaffold up, and we're not worried about how much time it takes because the progress is what we're looking for.
There's no pacing, so you don't have to rush.
Yeah. And so it's also individualized to the student where this kid is picking what their mastery-based projects are looking like. So that's where you start tying things into their interests or to their post-secondary goals, and then creating those partnerships in the community where students can use service learning as way to earn those competencies, or to create partnerships possibly with organizations where they can get connected with to start thinking about how they might use this learning after graduation. And so I just think that the space has so much potential, and we can really reframe our thinking from an asset-based perspective of capitalizing on the needs that our students have to create a school system or a model that allows us to capitalize on what students already bring in and meet them where they are at to take them to where they want to go.
Nice. And you mentioned so many things that I agree with. I think number one, we have to get away from letter-based grading. We have to get away from that.
Right.
I mean, just thinking about the subjectivity of it, it just doesn't help us at this point. And then with regard to competency-based grading, you mentioned artifacts. So I'm wondering, at the end of the school year, is the expectation that students are supposed to put together a portfolio with these artifacts that they could present not just to you, the teacher, but that could also serve as archives that they can take to maybe a job interview? Like, okay, here's what I've been doing at school. This is some of the work I produced that will give you an idea of what type of asset I can be to your organization or company. So I'm just trying to get some clarification around that for our audience.
Yeah, so I think that portfolios are a great way to enable students to take ownership over their learning and also to be the communicators of what they've learned. And so I think that a lot of schools that utilize competency-based education, they have students tracking their own learning in whatever way makes sense to them. So many schools do exactly what you're talking about, specifically in the CBE setting, where they have students to keep a portfolio of those artifacts throughout the year. And so let's say that there's 6 competencies that they have to master for Miss Morales's 11th grade English class. They'll keep those artifacts that they have created and that they've mastered in some format. Maybe that's in a binder, maybe that's a digital portfolio, whatever works for the student and for the teacher. And then at the end of the year, you can have the students do a symposium where students are communicating maybe to district administration, to other teachers, to each other about the things that they've learned, how they learned it, what they did to show you that they learned it, and why this should serve as evidence for them to progress to the next level. And so kind of like students are defending their ability to perform at the next level, and kind of a culmination of all of the hard work that they have engaged in over the year, and also to see how different students have communicated their mastery of those same topics in different ways, just to reaffirm for all students that we learn in different ways, we show our mastery of things in different ways, and you all mastered the same thing, but it looked different, and that's fine, and it's beautiful, because now we can look at how these things might converge to help our worldview become more complete about the same topic, or to dig a little bit deeper into something that maybe we haven't thought about before.
Right, because when I was teaching in Boston, we had to produce artifacts based on our instructional practice
Right.
and overall professional practice. So I remember having to upload exemplars of student work, photos of anchor charts and other things. And that served as part of my evaluation. But then on the student side, we didn't give them that agency to do that. They pretty much just had to do whatever work we gave them and just prepare for the MCAS, so our state test. And that was it. So it's like, if that's what works for teachers and it's effective, why don't we just translate that to our students?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the connection that you're making about teacher evaluation and student evaluation, how we don't typically go about it the same way. The reason that we can't get out from the chokehold of teacher evaluations either is because one of the benefits, we can talk about the system and the different evaluation models that are used being flawed individually, but the overall process, one of the greatest skills that it's enabling and equipping us with is metacognitive skills, to think about our thinking and to think about what we're doing and how we can communicate that to other people. And so that is one of the gifts that we also give to our students when we're expecting them to keep track of their own learning, and also putting you in the driver's seat when you are sharing with others about what you've learned. You can also walk us through the process of how you learned it and what you learned about your learning while you were learning. And that's something that I think students are never invited to talk about. And that's oftentimes why, when we might pilot initiatives that have the goal of increasing student agency, our students are just so paralyzed with the choices that they have or the options that they have, because they've never been given a choice before. So moving to this type of a school model or teaching, learning, and assessment model, I think can really eradicate some of that worry with our students and truly encourage them to step into their power as the experts in the classroom and demonstrators of their learning.
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch: you don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur, or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. And when I started teaching, I was part of that NCLB era.
Oh, yes.
Where it was all about being a highly qualified teacher, passing no certification test, going through your teacher prep programs, getting that degree. And then basically that was the criteria. And I'm just thinking about why students aren't able to have that same type of agency as we do as teachers, depending on what state we're in. And I think it goes back to just the system. Everything is high stakes accountability. Everything is tied to the test. Even the pacing guides that we follow, they're connected to the test, essentially. So now this is starting to segue into the work that you're doing with Teach Plus, because I know you've done a lot of work with them and you're still with them to this day. So before you start to talk about how it's allowed you to grow as an educator, I'm interested in knowing how the work that you're doing there has intersected with the work that you've been doing in the classroom.
Yeah. So I love talking about Teach Plus. So I'm glad that you asked about this. And I think that they are one of the prime developers of myself as an educator and also as a scholar activist and a policy advocate. So I'm always happy to share opportunities and to share what it's been like to kind of step into that space and to see both sides of that coin, from policy and governance, as well as teachers as policy advocates. So the mission of Teach Plus is to empower excellent, experienced, and diverse teachers to take leadership over key policy and practice issues that advance equity, opportunity, and student success. And so for the nonprofit organization, they operate in a bunch of different states, but I've specifically worked with Teach Plus Illinois and also in the capacity of the National Senior Research Fellowship, which has engaged policy advocates and teachers from multiple states that Teach Plus has worked in since 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago now. But when my work with Teach Plus started in 2020, I was a K-12 policy fellow in Illinois. And so that's where I started to learn more about how teachers are policy advocates and teaching is political. And so how we can use our lived experiences to help bridge that gap between teachers and legislators as far as understanding what truly is going on and what are the needs closest to the hearts and minds of our most precious assets, which are our students, their families, and the communities in which we teach, which include those of the educators. So in 2020, I was part of a working group focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the state of Illinois. And we were really trying to focus on mandated training that is related to implicit bias in the state of Illinois. And so we know that many educators have to go through mandated clickable trainings that are not great. And so one of those
surface level at best.
Yes. And so one of those is related to implicit bias training. And what we know what the research says about implicit bias, and we're just going to call it what it is, racism, is that individual one-time trainings that are not ongoing and also are not collaborative and self-reflective have absolutely no impact on changing belief systems or value systems of anyone, but primarily for white women specifically. So when we're talking about who the teaching profession is mostly made up of and being understanding of the fact that the onus is on educators to ensure that they are checking their biases so that bias does not get in the way of the equitable opportunities that our students have, we need to do better as far as what the training opportunities look like. So my working group and I developed a DEI provider evaluation tool that school districts could use to check professional development providers and evaluate them once they receive training related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or for anti-racist content in PD providers, kind of to start the dialogue as far as when we allow providers to come into our school, how do we know that they're highly qualified to be delivering content around anti-racism, around bias, around supporting teachers through the journey of checking their biases and unpacking and unlearning? And so it was piloted with 25% of districts in the state of Illinois to try and get that dialogue going about who is receiving the most high quality professional development related to DEI and implicit bias, so that we can ensure that we are getting that great professional development that's actually pushing teachers to get better. And so then I continued in 2021 as a senior fellow after I was named Fellow of the Year with Teach Plus. And so in my senior fellow year with Teach Plus, we continued some of the similar work in diversity, equity, and inclusion from 2020, but we focused more on recruiting and retaining teachers of color. And so working on the first part of the pipeline, which is getting kids into the profession. And so we conducted a research study where we hosted focus groups for students of color who are interested in becoming teachers. And so these students might have been part of groups which viewers might be familiar with in their own local context called Educators Rising. And so We think about like future farmers of America, but for teachers. So it's a bunch of high school kids who are trying to think about, do I really want to become a teacher? Can I learn more about it in a safe and supportive space? And so we interviewed a bunch of kids at a state conference for Educators Rising in Illinois in the spring of 2021. And we were asking students about how culturally responsive or affirming their K-12 experiences had been, to learn more about their lived experiences in schools, and also how those experiences either drew them to the profession or turned them away. Because we have to understand that the impact that we are having on students not only affects them right now, but also affects their choices of whether they want to become teachers at all. And so many students were talking about the same things that we know, but it was reaffirming for us what we understand to be true about the power of relationships being one of the major inspirations or deterrents from becoming a teacher. So students were either becoming teachers in spite of or because of a positive relationship that they had with a teacher. And so we kind of talked about what is the focus and what is the role that teachers of color specifically play in their lives in schools. And then we also were talking about their ability to, or the lack of opportunity to, put input into the curriculum that's being taught to them, as well as the opportunities that teachers have once they get into the profession to build those competencies of what it means to be a culturally responsive teacher. So in 2021, the culturally responsive teaching and leading standards were passed by the Illinois State Board of Education, which is a huge step forward for the state of Illinois in terms of preparing teachers that are prepared to reach and teach students of all backgrounds. However, the culturally responsive teaching and leading standards only required state universities to align their coursework in teacher preparation programs to be a culturally responsive teacher by 2025. That's great for pre-service teachers, right? We're molding them into culturally responsive teachers, but that leaves out the more than 100,000 teachers across the state of Illinois who are in front of kids right now today.
In-service teachers.
Yeah, where are the in-service teachers' professional development around culturally responsive teaching? So my group and I, in that same year after we published the Teach Plus report for students of color who wanted to become teachers, we were focusing on in-service, which is the other part of the pipeline. We're getting them in, but once they're in, what is the dynamic ongoing PD that we're offering so that they can either hone their abilities to be a culturally responsive teacher or start that work if they're interested, but they might not be in a supportive environment where they're getting that innovative PD. And so we proposed to the State Board of Education a budget ask of a lot of money. And we said, here's what we're going to do with the money. We are going to provide professional development virtually in a collaborative space with teachers across the state where they can then take a needs assessment of their individual school and say, here's where we might need to grow a little bit in our cultural responsiveness. And here's what we're looking for from this professional development. We need help in the area of empowering students or increasing student agency, or family and community partnerships is maybe something that we're not so great at. And so we will work to offer speaker sessions or individual modules that teams can work through that are going to help them to create something in their school to turn that around. And so by the end of the program year, the teams will present at a showcase where they will talk about what they've learned throughout the pilot about what it means to be culturally responsive in their individual context and the project that they embarked on and what the results were. So after many times of meetings with legislators, meeting with state officials, and everyone saying, we're not sure if this is the right move for Illinois right now, they were able to find money in one of the title programs, and we were awarded $300,000 in fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 to pilot a series that is being modeled after one of our social studies PDs, and we're actually in collaboration with University of Illinois. And so I am super excited about the doors that this will open for teachers to share their brilliance, because we know that there are so many teachers who have already started this work that we can learn from, who will also then be walking the beginnings of that journey with teachers who really do want to learn more about what it means to be a culturally responsive, anti-racist educator, but they don't know where to start. So I think that my work with Teach Plus enabled me to pull all of these levers in multiple spaces where teachers are stepping into their power and using their voices about what our students need and what we need to be fully fulfilled and to sustain the work that we're doing in the profession and to bring more students along with us in the ride. So Teach Plus, working with Teach Plus over the past few years has truly been one of the most impactful professional development experiences that I have been grateful to have. And I'm looking forward to all of the amazing projects that I'll get to help other groups with this year as I return to the fellowship once again as an alumnus who's just trying to help other groups get some of the same results.
Man, that's amazing. And it makes me think back to when I was going through my own teacher training and prep. There was no conversation around education policy.
Mm-hmm.
I take it back. Whenever we talked about education policy, it was usually within the realm of special education. So, like understanding, you know, the ESCA and understanding, LRE, least restrictive environment, just some of the different clauses that we had to be aware of just to be in alignment. But there wasn't any talk about policy, whether it's at the local level, grassroots level, or even at the federal level. Those were things that you just found out through some of the issues that we came across as educators that we didn't really have an understanding about. But then when we went to a district meeting, when we went to a town hall and you heard the complaints from community members, stakeholders, and even teachers, you then realize, oh, this work is bigger than just what we're doing in the classroom. Now, let me go ahead and figure out how that's impacting other school districts. Let me get more knowledgeable about the law because we're so caught up in curriculum and pedagogy and all these different things that we forget the fact that some of the things that are happening at the local level have a negative impact on our ability to do our jobs.
Right.
So how are we able to get that knowledge more in advance so that we don't get into year 5, 6, and 7 and we're realizing, oh man, now I see why I can't do my job in the way that I want to. So that's
Yeah.
how it is for us.
Yeah, I think that a lot of teachers, and I was one of them, who underestimated my power and my voice before I became involved with Teach Plus. But that's the cool thing, is that when we realize that teachers have the vital perspective that legislators and policymakers need, and so bridging that gap between their understanding and ours, we can speak the language of power by speaking our truth about what is really going on in our classrooms, in our schools, in our local communities that they need to know about to contextualize some of these issues that they're voting on every single day. And so I think that that is also something that has been a way for my students to exercise their agency, is teaching students about the legislative process and how to get involved in speaking with legislators about issues that are closest to their hearts. That is every single speaking and listening and writing skill that educators already have to teach, especially English teachers anyway. But you could develop this into a civics project. And so students are doing this entry point into writing testimony where they can get up in front of the state board and to talk about how these things are impacting them on a daily basis, to get ready to write a testimony for a budget ask for something that they would like to see funded in their local community. And oftentimes when students have those opportunities, we're also empowering them to take risks in other ways in their life. And so it's a skill that just keeps on giving. And so I think that teachers who might be interested in entering the space, you're already in it and you're very uniquely positioned with your individual experience as an educator to tell the stories of things that you've experienced, and then to invite students along to tell their stories about what is happening in education and what needs to change. And so I think that another way, which many educators, I feel like that I know, you included, to share their stories is through the power of op-eds. And so that is something that's an easy lift, right? Social media is a storytelling tool. So we're telling our stories on social media all the time. But if we wrote it down and we were sharing it in specific platforms that are elevating voices of educators and students and teacher and educator communities, then you can get your story out to a larger basis that can spark conversations and ideas for others, including policymakers.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think that's where we're heading. And I know in a lot of our states, we have unions.
Mm-hmm.
In Massachusetts, we have so many teacher unions. Definitely in Illinois, teacher unions.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand how helpful unions can be when it comes to elevating our voices. So now I'm just wondering, when will we get to a point where we have student unions? If we're talking so much about activating student voice, and if they are the people who are serving in these institutions of learning, that's why we do this work. We do it for them. So why would we not listen to what their needs are and give them a space where they can express concerns about the way in which they're learning without negative consequence? I just feel like there's so many things that can work that are common sense, and we just make it hard for ourselves, you know, especially in education. I just think there are a lot of common sense things that we could be doing that we just don't do for whatever reason.
Well, and I think that that's also, I mean, and speaking also just like from my own context, teaching from alternative ed, youth are an unprotected class of citizens. No one cares what they
Mhm.
have to say, and no one cares what their needs are. And so, much less students who are the furthest from justice, like many of my students in alternative ed, we think that we're doing them a favor by making decisions on their behalf, and that we know what's best for other people's children instead of inviting them into a partnership where we are elevating their voices to speak about what their needs are for themselves. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot of reframing that needs to go into how we allow students to advocate for themselves. Teaching students about what advocacy is a primary way to fight against the disenfranchisement that many of our student groups have been facing historically. Teaching them about the power of using their voice to make a difference in their community, and how being a change agent is as easy as speaking up and sharing your story.
Absolutely. I think we just have to get out of that paternalism mode and
Yes,
just
absolutely.
let students speak up and just express themselves in a way that will allow us to hear where they're coming from.
Right.
But I do want to give you a chance to talk about your experience as the Illinois Teacher of the Year. I know as an ambassador, you're going all over the state of Illinois talking to different schools, different stakeholders, different elected officials about the needs of not only teachers within your home state, but also teachers throughout the nation. So I'd love to give you a chance to just share what that experience has been like for you um, doing this work.
Yeah, so I was announced as the Illinois Teacher of the Year in April. And so ever since then, I feel like it has been hitting the ground running, talking to people, going across the state and seeing other schools and dynamic programs and innovative practices that other people are utilizing to push students closer towards self-actualizing. And so it's been really inspirational to me, because I feel like that's the main part of professional development that we're robbed of in our own local contexts. Is we only know what people around us are doing, but I have no idea what people at the other part of the state are doing, or in different schools that maybe I don't work in with students who I don't serve. They might be utilizing or doing things that we all can learn from. And so it has been amazing just to see the different landscapes in so many educational contexts. And additionally, I am on the school board for the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, School District 428. So because many of my students are justice impacted, it is so important to me to see to it that students who may be incarcerated also have access to equitable learning opportunities and programming to help them to make the most of whatever they are currently navigating and when they re-enter. And so I have made a point to see all of the youth centers across Illinois and to go in to talk to the teachers and their students about their experiences, and also to see what their needs are and how those converge with or differ from the students that I teach, because alternative school and youth centers and juvenile detentions are all three different entities that sometimes my students might be a part of all three, but many times they look different. And so ensuring that we are highlighting the great opportunities that they are getting, and also making a point to elevate their voices when they feel that there are things that they need that they aren't currently getting. The other thing that I think has been so life-giving to me is that I've been able to visit many teacher preparation programs at state universities and colleges. And I love being around future teachers just because they have such a passion that reminds us all of why we started. But I think also being very candid about the experiences that I've had in a very specific place, which oftentimes is regarded as like a silo area in education, right? A lot of teachers don't even know what alternative ed is. And so it's significant that I'm the second teacher ever in Illinois State Teacher of the Year history to be from an alternative school. So I get to speak about those perspectives from an asset-based lens, so we can be talking about the specific needs that the demographic that I serve has, and how that learning and that expertise that I can share can also translate into more equitable outcomes for whoever they're serving. So I've been able to talk with them and to also share many of the projects that my students have done with poetry, which is impactful to me because many of the students whose voices they're hearing are no longer here for various reasons. So it's a way to pay homage to those students and the legacy that they've left behind, because many people who will never know them now get to know them. And even though they're not here, they still are here. And so I feel like taking my students along for the ride that way has been super significant to me, because my students are a group where the media has cast them aside. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development used to call East St. Louis the most distressed small city in America. And so all of these culturally destructive narratives about East St. Louis, about alternative schools, about justice impacted youth, about Black children, we get to provide a counter narrative about the beauty, the resilience, the genius that lives in the 89 blocks of East St. Louis, and to really rework for ourselves what the future of learning, not just for my students, but for all students, what it can look like when dedicated educators use each other as our greatest assets.
And you are a prime example of what it could look like. You are the ultimate counter narrative.
Thank you.
And I want to end with this question before we get into our closing questions. So you've been through a lot, and you've been an open book when it comes to your journey. I mean, you've talked about domestic violence, you've talked about even abortion, you've talked about your relationship with your father, and just so many things have happened to you in your life, and yet you're with me tonight. Well, tonight on my end, still early evening on your end, just talking about your education journey. So I just have to ask, and I'm sure there are people in the audience who are wondering, how can you still be in this position to be doing the work that you're doing? What allows you to just turn all that pain and all those trials into power and keep persistent through life?
Yeah, so I think that that is kind of my slogan as Teacher of the Year, is that we can turn our pain into power, and that can help people reveal their purpose. And the people who taught me that have been teachers. And so my journey as an educator is to do that for other people's children, because the beautiful work about education is that in this work, there is no such thing as other people's children. They are all of our children, and they deserve everything that we have and more than that. And so showing them that the hope for the future exists, and that a beautiful life despite adversity can still come around for us when we take the beautiful parts of something that's happened to us and we are able to reclaim power over it by sharing our story and speaking our truth about it, because that's how we can flip the narrative. And so a lot of people, as you know, they're privy to this like part of my life, right? Because I share very openly about all of the trials and tribulations that have specifically this year been occurring. I lost my dad very unexpectedly, about almost 3 months to the day after I was named Teacher of the Year. My father and I did not talk for the last 2 years for a lot of reasons that don't matter right now. But he wasn't at the Teacher of the Year banquet because I didn't give him the chance to be. And so the people who were there at my Teacher of the Year banquet, you probably saw a lot of my students there. But the other people who were there were my colleagues and also my English teacher from high school, who was also my dad's English teacher. And so I walked in to my dad's funeral when he passed away, thinking that I was going to have to talk to all these people I haven't seen in so many years and not knowing what I was going to say. And so I was distraught, to say the least. And so when I walked in, there were a million people, hadn't seen in what felt like lifetimes, but one that I remembered and who looked lovingly on me for the past 15 years now has been my freshman English teacher from high school, who, like I said, was my dad's teacher. And so the notion that like we walk with our students through various versions of themselves and ourselves, I say that because Mrs. Coakley was just Miss Peterson in her first year of teaching, trying to teach some kid who always slept in her reading class because he was up too late teaching himself Metallica songs on the guitar. That was my dad, right? But she made a commitment not to let him slip through the cracks, and she looked a little deeper than other people who had written him off and cast him aside. And up close, she saw a young person with so much potential and so much promise. And 1 year later, my dad found out he was going to be a dad after he graduated high school. I know in the photos that you might see of him on my page, he did not look ready either, but she was there for my dad throughout the next transition of his life as he navigated like teen parenthood, young adulthood without the next steps or the foresight to plan. And she accepted him as he was because she had faith in who he might become. She knew a version of my dad that I never met because she was his teacher before I was born, and that I will never know because he's gone now. She saw me through the versions of myself that my dad didn't have words to support and might have needed more time to understand throughout my life because, like I said, she was there at the banquet and my dad wasn't. And so my dad was a young kid lost in the world, which I sometimes feel the same, a young person now lost in the world without him. But she's the only person who knew both versions of us at those times, and she still chose to keep showing up, which is impactful to me because it related to your question. When we focus on the relationships that sustain us to keep going despite so much adversity or pain or grief and trauma and stress and struggle in our life, we see that life can be beautiful again if we have hope for the future. And powerful relationships are those that can heal those wounds from things like many that I've experienced to help me to believe that life is still beautiful, even when at one point in my life, I felt like the darkness might win. So truthfully, relationships with other people makes life worth living. It humanizes us in our experience, makes us feel like we are not alone, and also sustains us with the power and the fight to feel like we might want to keep going. So I am a proponent of strong relationships in education, not only, but also in life. It's so important to wrap yourselves up in a community that truly cares about you. And I feel like I'm so lucky to have met so many people like you through Clubhouse and other virtual communities, because I feel like I consider many of you part of my village that has helped sustain me when it felt like it was so much easier to give up than it was to keep going. But you all helped me to realize also that life can return to being something magical and beautiful in the future with the support of people who care about you to carry you there.
And I think this is a perfect way to end this conversation. Just an incredible story, Bree. Thank you so much for coming on. I know we were trying to do this for a minute, but we finally here, and I'm glad that people were able to hear your story once again if they've heard it before. And for those who haven't heard it before, here you are. And I hope you guys are inspired by that. So thank you so much again. And we're gonna have to do this again another time because there's still so much that we didn't get to, but this was a good part one if we ever get to a part two.
Yes, happy to come back. And I'm so grateful to you for your friendship over the years and your leadership in the ed space and just for your presence. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. You have a good rest of the day. All right, y'all. So about to end another episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. And as always, wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. We're going to do this again another time. Peace out, y'all.